Dan, let's start with how'd you get into cannabis in the first place?
Initially, like, how did I start smoking cannabis or business-wise?
Both.
11 years old, golf course, tin can. Was the first time I got high.
11 years old.
So that was, yeah.
Are you California born and raised?
No, actually Tampa, Florida, and then I bounced around a lot, but I grew up in Tampa.
Okay. I see people making a big deal out of the fact that you're a trust fund kid. Does that piss you off?
No, not really. That actually helped me out a lot. That's what helped me, really make a lot of money in poker, because the thing about poker is, like, people just don't want to play with people that can't lose a lot of money. And so when I got into poker, a lot of people were focusing on being the best poker player and, making, all the perfect moves. And for me, I knew that if I just got in with, like, super rich bad players, that I didn't have to be the best of the best. And it was okay to make some mistakes and, give a little bit more action than you were supposed to. So for me, having people think that, that was my background was, really helpful. My trust didn't even kick in until I was 35, and I gave it away anyways. But
you gave it away?
Yeah.
All of it?
Yeah, to my brother.
Really? Yeah. Can I ask why?
I just didn't really need it, and I'd made a ton of money. I mean, I was flexing on Instagram long before 35. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you made your own money, didn't need the trust fund.
Yeah.
The cannabis brand Ignite is all about you, and it's sexy and it's cool and it's a huge brand.
Yeah.
How far do you think that's going to take you in the cannabis world, though? Like, I first came across your billboards mile high down in LA, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Who is this fucking...
Perfect. That's what we were going for.
Yeah.
That's
So great, you got the brand, but now
Yeah.
how are you going to backfill the brand with, like, big time sales now that you're a public company?
No, that's a good question. And to back up a little bit, I don't want the whole brand to be about me. I'm launching it, I'm promoting it and whatever, but we've got, Cardi B's posting for us. Jake Paul, he did a post for free. We got, Nikita Dragon. She's like one of the most famous trans women. So we have, a lot of different demographics that we're hitting, athletes and so on and so forth. So I really want the brand to be, not just about me, which is why I didn't name it, Bilzerian Buds or something, like the rest of these guys doing it. And thankfully I didn't, because it's helping us out in Canada a lot because of the regulatory guidelines as far as, if there's a celebrity name attached, they won't even allow you to sell. So
right. So how focused are you on the actual everyday management of the brand and the company itself?
Pretty focused. I mean, this is my sole endeavor right now. Well, not my sole endeavor, but the one I'm putting the most effort into. And I got a great team. The team is more focused on the business piece of it. I mean, I do get involved, a lot in the day-to-day stuff, but I try and do more high level. We've got a lot of cool stuff coming out. We're focusing less on just the state-to-state stuff, the THC side, and focusing more on things that we can get into all 50 states, foreign countries, and really making this more of a global thing. That's my main focus. I want one proprietary device that does THC, CBD, and nic all in one, and nobody's really doing that. And so I kind of want to attack the jewel market a little bit on the nic side, foreign and domestic. We've got 200 grandfathered in flavors. So when the regulatory guidelines on that kind of become unclouded, we're gonna dive into that space as well. But the goal for me is to get people to stop smoking, people to switch, from nicotine to CBD, and then to have that one device when they do want to do THC and not have that stigma that's, normally attached with THC, because, somebody walks around with a 510 thread, the guy's smoking THC. Guy walks in with a jewel, he's smoking nic. So, to me, I kind of want to, and then we want to have a caffeine pod and, maybe just a, hookah flavor pod for the people that have that oral fixation that don't necessarily want to do nic or, some mind altering substance. So.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What's your favorite strain, bud, dab right now?
Kind of depends on what I'm doing. For working out, I'd say Tangy Jack. For sex, more like cookies. For sleeping, probably like a heavier indica, like wedding cake or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
How much are you going to be actually the ambassador of the brand? You say you don't want it to quite be about you,
No.
but people look at that Ignite and go, this guy's a sex-loving party animal. That's what I want to be. Therefore, I'm going to smoke and consume Ignite products. But you're how old now?
38.
38. How long can that go on, do you think?
The stem cells, who knows?
Blood change too, yeah.
Yeah, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Have you looked into that, the blood stuff?
Well, one of my business partners in my office, he's actually the guy who financed the German blood filtering machines.
It's a real thing. They've like combined old rats with young rats, shared blood supply. The older rats actually, went back age-wise. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on right now with medicine. Like I said, stem cells are a big piece of it. So I think, you're going to see people live to be, 150 years old in your lifetime. But,
sure.
That's not my goal, is to be 150 years old doing this bullshit. But as far as the brand goes, like I said, I'm launching it. I think, it's cool that people are, aspiring to do stuff that I'm doing. How long I'm going to be going, this hard, I don't know. Probably not forever, obviously. But it's, it's more than that, right? It's kind of, showing people that cannabis isn't just about, smoking pot and eating fucking, fruity pebbles and sitting on the couch. It's more, hey, we can smoke, we can work out, we can, surf, we can do fun stuff, we can travel the world, hang out with hot chicks. And, it's more of a, active lifestyle. And that's, really what I think cannabis needs to take away that stigma that it has of, you smoke pot and you're useless, you're lazy, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
what about other drugs like the hallucinogenics?
Big fan of mushrooms.
Big fan of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Ayahuasca.
I have not tried ayahuasca.
Peyote.
I did once. Yeah. I think it's more of like a medicine, honestly. Peyote's not it shouldn't be illegal. It's not a recreational drug. It's not something that you do to get fucked up with your friends. It's more of, kind of if you want to figure stuff out, you take peyote and, you kind of just, have the answers to your questions. I think it removes your ego a little bit.
Right.
And it's one of those things where, it's got a negative stigma, but, Native Americans have been using that for, thousands of years. San Pedro cactus, same thing. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I've only done it once, but I thought it was interesting. Mm-hmm. So,
you smoke dabs before you work out. I watched a video and you had a buddy over and you guys actually smoked this big pipe and then you work out and I'm like, what the fuck? Like who gets high to work out? So then I'm thinking about it and it's like I wanted to actually ask you like how does that improve or take away from the workout? Like for me, I don't understand how I could actually have that focus that I need to work out if I was too high.
Well, it kind of depends on what you're doing. For me, if I were to, smoke a fat dab and try and go do, a 2-hour run, that'd be pretty painful. But for working out, it gives me a better mind-muscle connection, so I get better pumps. It makes the gym more interesting. And I don't know. Like I said, I respond well to sativas, but if I were to try and do an indica and do that, it might not work out so good. Everybody's different, so your body's just going to, react to different cannabinoids different than mine, and so I think people really need to figure out like what works for them. Mm-hmm. And so for me, smoking a Tangie or smoking a Jack or lemon tree or whatever, those sort of sativas or even a sativa dominant hybrid really help me kind of like focus. I like I said, I wouldn't do it on a cardio day. I've done it on heavy leg days, but it's more of, something that I think is really good for like arm days or chest days or smaller muscle groups. We really want to focus on that muscle and get, the maximum, contraction possible. So
you bet. Ignite's famous for those mile-high billboards now everywhere we go. Canadians, companies aren't even allowed to advertise. How fucked are Canadians going to be when America tries to take over the Canadian market due to that discrepancy?
Well, when I come into the Canadian market, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Canadian companies, I think, but I'll be partnering with a Canadian company. So for me, I'm not trying to be, a grower. I'm not trying to come up to Canada and start a big farm, become a cannabis grower. I want to partner with the best grower and put the best products to market. So that's really what a brand is about, is knowing that when you see that GOAT logo, when you see Ignite, that the product is going to be good. Do I want to set up a farm in every single state and every single country? No, but I want to partner with the absolute best grower in those places. So, the Canadian growers that are partnering with us, I think they're going to be super stoked because we really have the only brand that can go into Canada, leased by Snoop, Khalifa Kush, Tyson Ranch. Willie's Reserve, not that, you know, those are really big brands, but those have names attached to them, celebrity endorsements, and they're not allowed. So Ignite is my company. I started it. It's nothing, you know, it doesn't have my name attached to it. There's plenty of other people supporting it, and so we should be good.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Ignite in Canada needs a Canadian growing partner? I mean, is that because you don't grow at all?
Well, I mean, you can't import to Canada, so would have to set up a whole grow in Canada and do that whole thing. And
you having those discussions now?
Just as far as partners?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a rollout plan.
Okay, that's pretty huge. All right, that's all the questions I have for you at this point. We'll keep in touch.
Cool, man.
Yeah, great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.